Some weeks ago, the agreement was signed which pledged the three great powers, Britain, the United States, and Russia, to work together in war and in peace. Two obstacles had hitherto stood in the way of unity, one strategic and the other political. Russia, bearing the weight of German blows on land, had repeatedly pleaded for a second front. Well, the commanders have been appointed, and the final preparations are in train. Militarily, therefore, the United Nations seem to be at one. What of the other obstacles? The rupture between two United Nations, Poland and Soviet Russia. It was assumed that this problem had also been discussed at Tehran, and measures propounded for its solution in the same spirit of amity and concord. Instead, as recent events have shown, the breach, far from being healed, was widened. Britain is more closely concerned than any other of the United Nations in the future of Poland, on whose behalf she went to war in pursuance of the Treaty of Mutual Assistance signed in London in August 1939 by Lord Halifax and Count Ryszyński. While Poland was being assaulted from the west by the Reichswehr, the Red Army crossed the frontier to the east and occupied half the country as a protective measure in accordance with a treaty signed in Moscow between Monsieur Molotov and von Ribbentrop. Breaking this treaty, the Germans in June 1941 attacked Russia and in the process swept the Red Army out of that part of Poland which had been occupied since September 1939. Poland had, by force of circumstances, been at war both with Germany and with Russia. What was to be her attitude now? The German attack united Britain and Russia. Britain and Poland had been allies since 1939. The dilemma was resolved by a treaty signed by Monsieur Maisky and General Sikorski in London in July 1941. Russia declared that the territorial changes made at Poland's expense were null and void. Diplomatic relations between the two countries were established. And they undertook to render one another aid and support of all kinds in the present war against Hitlerite Germany. Mr. Eden, in expressing satisfaction at this coming together, took occasion to reaffirm that His Majesty's government do not propose to recognize any territorial changes that take place during the course of the war unless they take place with the free consent and goodwill of the peoples concerned. This principle was subsequently embodied in the Atlantic Charter, which provided that no territorial changes would take place and that sovereign rights and self-government would be restored to those who had been forcibly deprived of them. It is, therefore, beyond dispute that the Polish frontiers are de jure what they were on the outbreak of war, that they have been recognized as such and can only be revised by the consent and goodwill of the parties concerned. This is a position from which neither Britain nor the United States could honorably recede, and which, in the light of recent developments, it becomes necessary categorically to reaffirm. Under the agreement signed by Monsieur Maisky and General Sikorski, an army composed of Poles, including those officers and soldiers who had been captured by the Russians when they entered Poland in September 1939, was to be set up on Russian soil. An amnesty was also to be granted to all Polish prisoners interned by the Soviet government. From time to time, complaints were made by both sides of delays and difficulties which thwarted the carrying out of these provisions. The Germans were not unresourceful in exploiting the situation and found their most fruitful opportunity in April 1943, when they alleged that they had discovered at Katyn the bodies of 10,000 Polish officers buried in their clothes and with their identity papers on them. They accused the Russians of having murdered them.